Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rocky here with Father Boniface Hicks. And as we discussed in our last episode that we are going to talk about in this one, just war theory. And given how many incorrect assumptions I had in the last episode, I don't want to start us off on a flawed step here. So I'm going to let you just jump this from the top, Father, and put us in the right mind space.
So I just refer you, Joe, and any of our listeners to the Catechism, paragraph 2302, through the end of that section, 2317, basically. And it's in the part of the Catechism that falls under the fifth commandment. So it's going through the moral law and is tied in with a number of other things related to murder, suicide, euthanasia, abortion. Um, but another section would be 2263 to 2267, which is about legitimate defense. And so uh, we have to balance all of these things out. Jesus, of course, is radical in making it clear that not only the commandment, you shall not kill, but then Jesus takes that and says, you have heard it was said of the men of old, you shall not kill, and whoever kills will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be liable to judgment. And it goes on from there. And so the basic principle is all human life is sacred. And so under no circumstance can anyone claim for himself the right directly to destroy an innocent human being. So that's actually the application of the commandment is no one has the right in any circumstance to destroy an innocent human being. And then we have to add in all of the proper caveats to bring this commandment, which appears in one place uh, in the gospel, but in the context of a much wider revelation. We can't take single words, a single line from Matthew chapter 5 and sort of absolutize it and apply it everywhere. We're always interpreting scripture in the context of the full revelation of God in Jesus Christ and in the context of theology. And so even the invitation of Jesus to have a sword, those are the words of Jesus himself. They aren't any less the words of Jesus than his words in the Sermon on the Mount. And so we can't sort of play one off the other and say, well, the Sermon on the Mount's more important. The sword comment doesn't matter, and then how do we actually parse that out in the real details of our individual lives? Well, the church helps us to do that, and so uh, starting with the apostles and then the fathers of the church applying their interpretation of scripture, and then ultimately discerned by the church's interpretive body, the official interpretive body, which is the successors of the apostles, the bishops and the pope, what we call the magisterium. That provides authentic teaching for us and helps us to apply all of these things in different circumstances. So one part of that is the right to legitimate defense. So in paragraph 2263, the Catechism says, the legitimate defense of persons and societies is not an exception to the prohibition against the murder of the innocent that constitutes intentional killing. And then it quotes from St. Thomas Aquinas, the act of self-defense can have a double effect, the preservation of one's own life and the killing of the aggressor. The one is intended, the other is not. And so this is where things start to get a little bit interesting. So I can never intend the killing of another life. I can intend to defend my own life. And then in the process of doing that, I may end up using deadly force, which, as a side effect, we could say, as a double effect, ends up destroying another's life. So that's not a necessary thing. I could even be making the effort to cripple the person, to stop the person, to whatever it is. But I'm ultimately trying to defend my own life. That's the principle, the primary effect, and so as not to use that principle to justify any kind of I don't know, any kind of action as being moral, then there's some careful phrasing around that principle of double effect that our moral theology has sketched out over the last several centuries. What I just read was Thomas Aquinas, which is from the 13th century. This isn't like a modern teaching by any means, but anyway, how we actually apply that. The Catechism goes on to explain love toward oneself remains a fundamental principle of morality. Therefore, it is legitimate to insist on respect for one's own right to life. Someone who defends his life is not guilty of murder, even if he is forced to deal his aggressor a lethal blow. And then again, the Catechism quotes from St. Thomas, Secunde Secunde, and says, if a man in self-defense uses more than necessary violence, it will be unlawful, whereas if he repels force with moderation, his defense will be lawful. Nor is it necessary for salvation that a man omit the act of moderate self-defense to avoid killing the other man, since one is bound to take more care of one's own life than of another's. So we might say, well, if somebody comes at you with a knife, you have to let him stab you to death. Well, no, you don't. You have the right to protect yourself. And you have the right to protect yourself even to the point of potentially turning that knife on the man. And without intending to kill him, you may end up killing him because of the struggle, because that's the only way to actually stop him from killing you. And that's legitimate. So that's easiest to see at the personal level, and then we can take that up in and the Catechism goes on to say there as well. Anyway, a number of additional things, but it's easiest to take up at the personal level to see that there's a right to self-defense, and there isn't a right to kill the aggressor as such. There's a right to defend myself, and that may end up including killing the aggressor as an undesired but perhaps a kind of necessary consequence. And then to take that a next level and to say, well, now you, Joe, have a little boy, and somebody comes at your little boy with a weapon, and you don't just stand by and watch somebody damage or hurt, kill your little boy. You attack the guy to stop him from this aggressive action. And in the process of doing that, you apply deadly force that because he won't stop without you continuing to hit him, he keeps getting up, whatever it is. Maybe you can elaborate the details yourself, but you do that in order to protect that innocent human life. And you have an obligation to do that, even more than you have an obligation to protect your own life. You have an obligation to protect that little boy who is absolutely dependent on you as his father. And so then you can elaborate that out another degree and think of being an authority over a town and being attacked by an army from another town. And you have the right, in fact, the obligation to protect the people in your town. And again, you can't, and this is where we're in the world of self-defense. We're not in the world of, attacking and destroying others for the sake of attacking and destroying others. And so I think you start to get the right restraint. I won't claim that this isn't messy because, and especially in modern warfare, one could really question, is there any place for nuclear weapons? I mean, basically the church has said, no, there's no place for nuclear weapons. There's just no way to use nuclear weapons that you're actually only stopping unjust aggressors. You're always destroying things excessively and harming innocent people in the process of weapons, nor is mutually assured destruction a legitimate policy. That having nuclear weapons to prevent the use of nuclear weapons is not a moral approach. The church has been pretty clear about that. So it gets complicated in modern warfare. Things like drones and lots of explosives with broad impact that damage whole structures, destroy cities, and endanger innocent lives or destroy innocent lives, these things start to get pretty hard to justify. And even St. Augustine says something like, in order to really kill licitly, again, it's only to stop an unjust aggressor and when deadly force is necessary, but you would have to be able to look your aggressor in the eye and love him before committing this, the act of self-defense that ends up killing him. So it starts to be pretty hard. And that's why through the Middle Ages, even when it was determined to be a just war, the act of killing in war, they just presumed was something problematic. And these guys would make pretty extensive penances in order to do reparation for crimes for the killing that took place in war. I mean, and some of the initial like pilgrimages to the Holy Land were soldiers who were working out their salvation, having been involved in these kinds of activities, and then wanting to repent and of it. That's a whole other discussion why such significant penances were taken up at that time more so than they would be now. But in any event, the point being that those who even killed in the midst of war were not sort of just presumed to be innocent because they were acting in according to double effect and killing as a secondary as a double effect, a secondary effect of self-defense or defending innocence. So it's definitely messy in that whole space. But again, back to the point, there is a right to self-defense. There is even an obligation to protect the innocent, and that can involve deadly force and the use of weapons, and that's not contrary to Christianity.
So obviously a lot there, and you're right. You can see it much easier on the individual level, and the further out you get, the messier it gets. You can certainly make the argument that all the people in Ukraine are within that direct line, that they're being attacked by a aggressor, simply enough, and they have the right to resist, I guess is the way you're saying that. But the thought that I had there is, you said that the caveat being that you have to be able to truly love your neighbor, truly love the person who is coming after you. And I look at obviously I have to look at things throughout my own life. I'm myself, and a couple of months ago, obviously, my first son here is born. And to me, I thought I knew what love was, but going through this span of his very early and beginning life, it's changing. Now, does that mean it's different than the love that I had for other people before that? I don't think so, but I definitely know that it's different now. Before, I never had someone who was solely dependent upon me, as you said there in your description. And I bring that up because I think that as we talk about love and grow in our life, that at least for me, I experience it differently now and have different feelings and thoughts about stuff like that. And my question is that, as you've brought up in the past and other episodes about being reductionist and minimalist, and we don't want to take things in relationship to the minimum, it seems that there is an argument for people who want to create violence and use just war as an excuse to minimize the requirement for love element. So I wanted to start by just saying is what I'm experiencing the view of the church, or does the church just simply say love is love? It's like the number 4. The number 4 is number 4. You add 2 to it, you're going to come 6. The number 4 is number 4. So my question is it like that, or does the church see love as something that is different within each of us and therefore kind of malleable?
Well, love is love is always going to be define to a certain degree based on our own capacity. A simple definition of love that St. Thomas Aquinas uses is to will the good of the other. And so that that willing the good of the other is going to be based on my capacity. So I can only carry that out in certain ways. I as a man, and I as a priest, and I as somebody who is able-bodied and has access to some resources. I mean, there are some ways that I can will the good of the other based on what is particular to me, and particular capacities that I have. And then it's also going to be based on what the needs of the other are. And so it isn't kind of one size fits all in that sense, because not everybody has the same needs. And so willing the good of the other is going to be different in different circumstances. One person might need to be built up. One person might need to be, spoken strongly to. One person might need to be fed. Another person might need to be brought to church. So that's always, love is always particular. It's not general, and it always needs to be applied in a particular way. In the context of what it means to look at a man and love him before killing him, that too, is in kind of an interesting way. It gets difficult to talk about these things. We're in the land of certain kinds of abstractions, but one could say that if the aggressor, if the enemy is doing evil in the destroying of innocence, and that's why I'm protecting myself and protecting others, then in some way the person would be better off killed than allowed to do even more grave evils. That would be an interpretation from the fathers of the church, that why does, we could rephrase it, why does God allow someone to die, or deadly force to be used? We all know that even guns can misfire, and swords can miss their target, and lots of things can happen that prevent our intention from being carried through. God could prevent certain deaths from taking place. Why does he allow them? Well, one reason can be that it would be better for that person to be stopped. They're only going to multiply evils from here. But anyway, it's one way to look at it. Likewise, it could be in that very moment of being struck, maybe there's a moment of openness to salvation, that the dying breath also goes together with a prayer, a cry for help, that maybe at that moment in that person's life, they're most ready to be able to receive the gospel in a way, something like the good thief, who is able to receive that in the last moment of his life. So anyway, those are all the things that we don't really know very well about. But all of that is to say, loving is always particular, and is going to be based on my capacity and the capacity of the other.
Yeah, that's something that I guess we've discussed many times. It's our job to increase our capacity of love, and as we discussed in the last episode, I'm trying to live off the teachings you've been giving me throughout the last 5 years, and trying to grow in other capacities and to learn more. Part of the virtue of prudence there, and I'm still getting blindsided and proven wrong quite a bit. And I know that I'm actively trying to get better at this, as just talking about me as an individual, not as, maybe a little bit aside from the just word conversation. It makes me wonder how actively trying to do this and still seeing how far I have to go, or really not even knowing that this level even existed, that this capacity was there. How do people who aren't actively trying to do this, someone who's just fumbling through life, if you will, without really thinking about capacity or emotion for love and improvement, how does that work? It seems, just, again, this might just be abstract, that's such a confining and limiting thing. But that being said, I had no idea where I'm at existed 2 years ago, and I thought I was in a very good place then. So I apologize if that just comes off as ramblings, but it's it's almost a mystery to me that I just don't understand.
Yeah, well, these are how do we grow in knowledge in any realm? We tend to be somewhat demand driven. This hasn't been perhaps a pressing need for you. We also tend to pick a lot of things up from the culture. And on the one hand, I think if I pressed you, about some of these things, you could have realized, well, yeah, I mean, there have been armies and wars that were not sort of categorically condemned by Christianity. I mean, we have military chaplains, right? We have who have been named saints. We have good Catholics who fight in armies and things like that. I mean, all of that, and if you were forced to, you could have teased out why would that be the case, and you wouldn't do it. I also wouldn't do it with the sort of clarity and precision of the Catechism. I mean, there's a benefit to smart people who have thought about these things, and the Holy Spirit who works through the magisterium and guides us into all truth. So, then as the question comes up, then you look things up and you figure things out and you find ways to explain them. But I mean, the just war doctrine is not the most pressing issue for selling houses, so it's not not unreasonable that you may not have picked all the things up prior to this.
That is true. And it made me think of a quick little aside there that, everything in my life, I recognize that if I'm not the best at it, I probably should either become better at it or figure out someone who is better at it and then lean on their knowledge and or ability. And I think that a certain way, that's kind of how at least the American version of capitalism is built. Lean on someone who knows how to fix your car if you don't, and go to a mechanic's office. So what I going to there is the catechism also always has, or obviously has, years upon years of learning and incredibly smart people who have contributed to how it's been developed. But there still is a skill and I think a necessity to try to learn yourself. At least for me, in my understanding, that when I have tried to fix something, I have gotten a greater appreciation for seeing how a professional actually does it. And I think that thinking about morality and the catechism as a whole is about morality, and the whole faith, that it puts us in a better place when we start to contemplate, if I had to write something like this, or if I had to tease it out, as you said, how would I do it? Because that's part of where my mind just tends to go sometimes. And again, I don't know if that's a good advice or a bad advice thing, but something that I wanted to make sure I got out before we concluded today's episode.
Yeah, that's right. We learn things for ourselves and we figure out who knows them and we learn from those people. And fortunately, we have books, and especially in our Catholic tradition, we have a tremendous amount of teaching. But the Catechism is a real gift for us. I mean, it really goes through some very complicated things in very precise ways, and then includes a lot of footnotes and original source material that you can go into to look more deeply. I mean, those sections from the Summa Theologica of St. Thomas explain the just war doctrine in even more detail, and then we can find courses and professors and all of these things. So yeah, and as you say, we learn to do it better by finding the experts, and we're not trying to reinvent the wheel all the time. At the same time, we should have access. Faith gives us access to truths without having to reinvent the wheel. So we do develop an intuition for the faith, the sensus fidelium, the sense of the faithful, that helps us in these matters of discernment. We start to get a sense of, what does this mean, or what would this be? It's amazing how the gift of faith provides that for us in a lot of circumstances, even if we can't fully describe why or where we got that from. we can often tease those things out. We certainly can do that a lot better for things of faith than for a car engine.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I mean, some people have an intuition, a mechanical intuition, but the point is that the baptized who have developed the virtue of faith really get that intuition that helps to discern those truths if we're, again, preserving the sanctifying grace in our souls and trying to live lives of goodness and follow Christ. There's a lot that we get for free without needing to understand necessarily all the details of how we got there. A little illustration of this, I had the great blessing to go see Jordan Peterson speak at Franciscan University, and he gave an hour-long lecture and basically re-derived for us from scientific principles why the Bible is true. And the theology professor who was sitting next to me leaned over and he goes, "Well, see, this is what St. Thomas was saying when he said that faith gives the little old lady with her rosary the same thing that the greatest philosophers could barely come to by their own efforts." And all of us, I think, there knew that the Bible was true without this very fascinating and detailed and compelling lecture of Jordan Peterson. So, we can really lean on that virtue of faith, that sense of faith, and then as we are able to, and as we have interest, we can delve into these more nuanced questions and discover the real beauty of how things all fit together in the teaching of the church. I'm not hearing you, Joe.
Oh, sorry about that, Father. I appreciate your answer there, and for enlightening me throughout today's episode and last week's episode for how wrong I can be and how much knowledge that you have. And I appreciate that you always be willing to correct me throughout all of it. And we hope that this has been beneficial for everyone out there who listens. So we will be with you again here next week. And please share us with a friend, because that's how we've been growing, is through word of mouth. So thank everyone very much. We'll be with you next week.